Propositions 120 to 139 of the Elements of Theology by Proclus, translated by Thomas Taylor. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Proposition 120. Every god possesses in his own hyparxis a providential inspection of the whole of things, and a providential energy is primarily in the gods. For all other things which are posterior to the gods energize providentially through the participation of them, but providence is connascent with the gods. For if to impart good to the subjects of providential energy is the prerogative of the providential peculiarity, but all the gods are goodnesses, either they do not impart themselves to anything, and thus nothing will be good in secondary natures, and whence will that be derived which subsists according to participation, except from those natures that primarily possess peculiarities? Or if they do impart themselves, they impart good, and in consequence of this providentially attend to all things. Providence, therefore, subsists primarily in the gods. For where is the energy which is prior to intellect except in superessential natures? But providence, pronoia, as the name signifies, is an energy prior to intellect. Energia esti pro nous. The gods, therefore, from being gods and from being goodnesses, provide for all things, and fill all things with the goodness which is prior to intellect. Proposition 121. Every divine nature has indeed, for its hyparxis, goodness, but possesses a power which is unsubdued and at once incomprehensible by all secondary natures. For if it providentially attends to the whole of things, there is in it a power which has dominion over the subjects of its providential energy, through which, being unsubdued and uncircumscribed by all things, divine natures fill all things with, and subject all things to themselves. For everything of a ruling nature, which is the cause of other things, and has dominion over them, rules through abundance of power, and predominates according to nature. The first power, therefore, is in the gods, not indeed having dominion over some things, but not over others, but equally comprehending in itself according to cause the powers of all beings. This power neither being essential, nor much less unessential, but being connascent with the hyparxis of the gods, and superessential. Moreover, the boundaries of all knowledge presubsist uniformly in the gods. For through divine knowledge, which is exempt from the whole of things, all other knowledge has a subsistence. This knowledge neither being intellectual, nor much less being a certain knowledge posterior to intellect, but being established according to the divine peculiarity above intellect. Whether, therefore, there is a divine knowledge, this knowledge is occult and uniform, or has the form of the One; or whether there is a power uncircumscribed by all things, this power is in a similar manner comprehensive of all things; or whether there is a divine goodness, this goodness defines the hyparxis of the gods. For if all things are in the gods, knowledge, power and goodness are also in them, but their hyparxis is characterized by that which is most excellent, and their hypostasis also is according to that which is best. But this is goodness. Proposition 122. Everything divine provides for secondary natures, and is exempt from the subjects of its providential care. Providence neither relaxing the unmingled and unical transcendency of that which is divine, nor a separate union abolishing providence. For divine beings abiding in their unical nature and in their own hyparxis fill all things with the power of themselves, and everything which is able to participate of them enjoys the good which it is capable of receiving according to the measures of its proper hypostasis. Divine natures, in the meantime, illuminating beings with good by their very essence, or rather prior to essence. For that which is divine, being nothing else than goodness, it supplies all things with an unenvying abundance of good, by its very being, not making a distribution according to a reasoning process, but other things receiving indeed according to their desert, and divine natures according to their hyparxis. Neither, therefore, in providing for other things do they receive a habitude or alliance with the subjects of their providential care, for they benefit all things by being that which they are. But every thing which makes by its very essence makes without habitude, and with an unrestrained energy, for habitude is an addition to essence. Hence also it is preternatural. Nor, being separate, do they withdraw their providential care, for thus they would subvert, which it is not lawful to say, their own hyparxis, the peculiarity of which is goodness. For it is the province of goodness to extend itself to everything which is able to participate of it. And the greatest of all things is not that which is boniform, but that which is beneficent. Either, therefore, no being will possess this beneficent nature, or the Gods will possess it prior to beings. For it is not possible that a greater good should be present with the natures that are good by participation, but a less good with those that are primarily good. Proposition 123. Everything divine is itself indeed, on account of its superessential union, ineffable and unknown to all secondary natures, but it is comprehended and known by its participants. Hence, that which is first is alone perfectly unknown, as being imparticipable. For all knowledge which subsists through reasoning and language pertains to beings, and in beings possesses the apprehension of truth. For it comes into contact with conceptions and subsists in intellections. But the Gods are beyond all beings. Neither, therefore, is that which is divine doxastic, or the object of opinion, nor is it dianoetic, nor intelligible. For every being is either sensible, and on this account doxastic, or truly existing being, and on this account intelligible, or it is between these, subsisting as being, and at the same time generation, and on this account is dianoetic. If, therefore, the Gods are superessential and subsist prior to beings, there is neither any opinion of them, nor science and dianoia, nor intellection, but the nature of their peculiarities is known by the beings that are suspended from them, and this by a necessary consequence. For the differences of participants are co-divided conformably to the peculiarities of the participated natures, and neither does everything participate of everything, for there is no coordination of things perfectly dissimilar, nor does any casual thing participate of that which is casual, but that which is kindred is conjoined to that which is kindred, and proceeds from that to which it is allied. PROPOSITION CXXIV. Every God knows partible natures impartibly, temporal natures without time, things which are not necessary necessarily, mutable natures immutably, and in short, all things in a manner more excellent than the order of the things known. For if everything which is with the Gods is with them according to their peculiarity, it is evident that the knowledge in the Gods of things inferior will not subsist according to the nature of the inferior things, but according to the exempt transcendency of the Gods. Hence, their knowledge of multiplied and passive natures will be uniform and impassive. If, therefore, the object of knowledge is partible, divine knowledge will be impartible. If the objects that are known are mutable, the knowledge of the Gods will be immutable. If they are contingent, they will be known by the Gods necessarily, and if they are indefinite, definitely. For that which is divine does not receive knowledge from subordinate beings, in order that thus the knowledge may be such as is the nature of the thing known. But subordinate beings become indefinite about the definite nature of the Gods, are changed about their immutability, receive passively that which is impassive in them, and temporally that which in them is without time. For it is possible for subordinate to be surpassed by more excellent natures, but it is not lawful for the Gods to receive anything from beings inferior to themselves. PROPOSITION CXXV. Every God, from that order from which he began to unfold himself into light, proceeds through all secondary natures, always indeed multiplying and dividing the communications of himself, but preserving the peculiarity of his own hypostasis. For progressions being effected through diminution, first natures are everywhere after a manner multiplied into the decrements of secondary natures, but these proceeding according to a similitude to their producing causes, receive their orderly distribution, so that the whole of that which proceeds is after a manner the same with, and different from, that which abides, through its diminution indeed, appearing to be different, but through continuity with its cause, not departing from sameness with it, but such as that which abides is among first, such is that which proceeds among secondary natures, and thus an indissoluble communion of the series is preserved. Each of the Gods, therefore, is unfolded into light appropriately in the orders in which he makes his evolution, but he proceeds from thence as far as to the last of things through the generative power of first natures. He is always, however, multiplied according to a progression from unity into multitude, but he preserves sameness in the progression through the similitude of the things that proceed to the leader and primary cause of each series. Proposition 126. Every God who is nearer to the One is more total, but the God who is more remote from it is more partial. For the God who is the cause of a greater number of effects is nearer to that which produces all things, but he who is the cause of a less number is more remote from it, and he, indeed, who is the cause of a greater number of effects is more total, but he who is the cause of a less number is more partial. And each indeed is a unity, but the one is greater, and the other less in power. The more partial gods also are generated from the more total, the latter not being divided, for they are unities, nor changed in quality, for they are immovable, nor multiplied by habitude, for they are unmingled. But they generate secondary progressions from themselves, which are the decrements of the natures prior to them, through abundance of power. Proposition 127. Everything divine is especially primarily simple, and on this account most sufficient to itself. For that it is indeed simple is evident from its union, since everything divine is most unical. But a thing of this kind is transcendently simple. That it is also most sufficient to itself may be learnt by considering that a composite nature is indigent, if not of other things to which it is external, yet of those things of which it is composed. But that which is most simple and unical, and which establishes itself in the good, is most sufficient to itself. Such, however, is everything divine. Neither, therefore, is it indigent of other things existing as goodness itself, nor of things requisite to composition, because it is unical. Proposition 128. Every God, when participated by natures nearer to himself, is participated without a medium. But when participated by natures more remote from himself, the participation is through a less or greater number of media. For the former, through their alliance, being uniform, are immediately able to participate of the divine unities. But the latter, through their diminution and extension into multitude, require other things which are more united, in order that they may participate of the unities themselves, and not of things united. For united multitude subsists between unity itself and divided multitude, being indeed able to coalesce with unity, but allied in a certain respect to divided multitude, through the representation of multitude. Proposition 129. Every divine body is divine through a deified soul, but every soul is divine through a divine intellect, and every intellect is divine through the participation of a divine unity. And unity indeed is of itself a God. Intellect is most divine, soul is divine, but body is deiform. For if every number of the Gods is above intellect, but participations are effected through kindred and similar natures, the impartible essence will primarily participate of the superessential unities. But the nature which comes into contact with generation will participate of them secondarily, and generation in the third place. each of these likewise participates of them through the proximately superior natures. And the peculiarity of the Gods indeed proceeds as far as to the last of things in its participants, but through media allied to itself. For unity indeed imparts the transcendent power of itself to the first intellect among divine natures, and causes this intellect to be like itself according to unical multitude. But through intellect it is also present with soul, conjoining soul with intellect and co-inflaming it with divine fire, when this intellect is participable. And through the echo of soul, imparting also to body its own peculiarity, if it is a body which participates something of soul. And thus body becomes not only animated and intellectual, but also divine. For it receives life indeed and motion from soul, but indissoluble permanency from intellect, and divine union from participated unity. For each of these imparts its own hyparxis to the subsequent natures. PROPOSITION CXXX. In every divine order, such things as are first are in a greater degree exempt from the natures proximately arranged under them, than these latter are from things subsequent. And secondary natures in a greater degree adhere to their proximate superiors, than following natures to these. For by how much more unical and total anything is, by so much the more is it allotted a greater transcendency with respect to subsequent natures. And by how much the more diminished it is according to power, by so much the more is it connascent with the natures posterior to itself. And more elevated natures indeed are more united with their more principal causes, but inferior natures are less united with them. For it is the province of a greater power to be more exempt from subordinate, and to be more united to better natures; as, on the contrary, it is the province of a diminution of power to recede in a greater degree from more excellent, and to be copassive with subordinate natures. And this happens to secondary, but not to first natures, in every order of things. PROPOSITION CXXXI. Every God begins his own energy from himself. For he first exhibits the peculiarity of his presence with secondary natures, in himself, because he imparts himself to other things also according to his own exuberant plenitude. For neither is deficiency adapted to the Gods, nor fullness alone. For everything deficient is imperfect, and not being itself perfect, it is impossible it should make another thing to be perfect. But that which is full is alone sufficient to itself, and is not yet prepared to communicate. It is necessary, therefore, that the nature which fills other things, and which extends to other things the communications of itself, should be superplenary, or exuberantly full. Hence, if a divine nature fills all things from itself with the good which it contains in itself, it is exuberantly full. And if this be the case, establishing first in itself the peculiarity which it imparts to others, it will extend to them the communications of superplenary goodness. PROPOSITION CXXXII. All the orders of the Gods are bound in union by a medium. For all the progressions of beings are effected through similars, and much more will the orders of the Gods possess an indissoluble continuity, as subsisting uniformly, and being defined according to the One, which is the principal cause of their existence. The decrements, therefore, are produced unitedly, and alone according to the similitude in beings of secondary to first natures; and this because the hyparxis of the Gods much more consists in union than the subsistence of beings. All the divine genera, therefore, are bound together by appropriate media, and first natures do not proceed into progressions perfectly different without a medium, but through the genera common to each, from which they proceed, and of which they are immediately the causes. For these congregate the extremes into one union, being spread under some things connascently, but proximately exempt from others; and they preserve the well‐ordered generation of divine natures. PROPOSITION CXXXIII. Every God is a beneficent unity, or an unific (enopoios) goodness; and each, so far as a God, possesses this hyparxis. The first God, however, is simply good and simply one; but each posterior to the first is a certain goodness and a certain unity. For the divine peculiarity distinguishes the unities and goodnesses of the Gods, so that each according to a certain peculiarity of goodness, such as that of perfecting, or connectedly containing, or defending, benefits all things. For each of these is a certain good, but not every good. But the first God pre‐establishes a unical cause. Hence, that is the good, as giving subsistence to all goodness. For all the hyparxes of the Gods are not together equal to the One; so great a transcendency is the first God allotted with respect to the multitude of the Gods. PROPOSITION CXXXIV. Every divine intellect intellectually perceives indeed as intellect, but energizes providentially as a God. For it is the illustrious prerogative of intellect to know beings, and to have its perfection in intellections; but it is the province of a God to energize providentially, and to fill all things with good. This communication, however, and replenishing with good, is accomplished through the union of the replenishing natures with the causes prior to themselves, which intellect, also imitating, passes into sameness with intelligibles. A divine intellect, therefore, so far as it energizes providentially, is a God; providence being established in an energy prior to intellect. Hence, as a God, it imparts itself to all things; but as intellect, it is not present with all things. For a divine nature extends to things into which the intellectual peculiarity does not proceed. For beings which are without intellect desire to energize providentially, and to participate of a certain good; but this is because all things indeed do not aspire after intellect, not even all such as are able to participate of it. All things, however, aspire after good, and hasten to obtain it. PROPOSITION CXXXV. Every divine unity is participated by some being immediately, or without a medium, and every deified nature is extended to one divine unity, as many also as are the participated unities, so many are the participating genera of beings. For neither two or more unities are participated by one being. For since the peculiarities in the unities are different, must not that which is connascent with each be different also, since contact is effected through similitude? Nor is one unity participated in a divided manner by many beings. For many beings are unadapted to be conjoined with unity, and as beings they are unconjoined with the unity which is prior to beings, and as many they are separated from unity. It is necessary, however, that the thing which participates should be partly similar to that which is participated, and partly different and dissimilar. Since, therefore, that which participates is something belonging to beings, but unity is superessential, and according to this they are dissimilar, it is necessary that the participant should be one, in order that according to this it may be similar to the one which is participated, though of these the latter is one in such a manner as to be unity, but the former so as to be passive to the one, and to be united through the participation of unity. PROPOSITION CXXXVI. Every God who is more total and arranged nearer to the first is participated by a more total genus of beings. But the God who is more partial and more remote from the first is participated by a more partial genus of beings. And as being is to being, so is one divine unity to another. For if unities are as many in number as beings, and vice versa, and one unity is participated by one being, it is evident that the order of beings proceeds according to the order of the unities, being assimilated to the order prior to beings. And more total beings indeed are connascent with more total unities, but more partial beings with more partial unities. For if this were not the case, again similars would be conjoined with dissimilars, and there would not be a distribution according to desert. These things, however, are impossible. Since from thence the one and an appropriate measure are luminously imparted to all things, and from these proceed. Much more, therefore, will there be an order of participation in these, similars being suspended as much as possible from similars. PROPOSITION CXXXVII. Every unity in conjunction with the one gives subsistence to the being which participates of it. For the one, as it gives subsistence to all things, so likewise it is the cause of the participated unities, and of beings suspended from these unities. But the unity belonging to every being produces the peculiarity which shines forth in that particular being. And the one indeed is the cause of existence simply, but unity is the cause of alliance, because it is connascent with the one. Hence unity is that which of itself defines the being which participates of it, and essentially exhibits in itself a superessential peculiarity. For everywhere from that which is primary, that which is secondary is that which it is. If, therefore, there is a certain superessential peculiarity of deity, this also belongs to the being which participates of it superessentially. Proposition 138. Of all the deified natures which participate of the divine peculiarity, the first and highest is being itself. For if being is beyond intellect and life, as has been demonstrated, and if it is also after the One, the cause of the greatest number of effects, being will be the highest deified nature. For it is more single than life and intellect, and is on this account entirely more venerable. But there is not anything else prior to it except the One. For prior to unical multitude, what else can there be except the One? But being is unical multitude, as consisting of bound and infinity. And in short, the superessential One is prior to essence. Since also, in the illuminations which are imparted to secondary natures, the One alone extends beyond being. But being is immediately posterior to the One. For that which is being in capacity, but is not yet being, is nevertheless according to its own nature one. And that which follows the being that is in capacity, is now being in energy. Hence, in the principles of things, non-being is immediately beyond being, as something more excellent, and no other than the One itself. Proposition 139. All things which participate of the divine unities originate indeed from being, but end in a corporeal nature. For being is the first of participants, but body the last. For we say that there are divine bodies. For the highest of all the genera of bodies, souls and intellects, are attributed to the Gods, that in every order, things analogous to the Gods may connect and preserve secondary natures, and that each number may be a whole, containing all things in itself, according to the whole which is in a part, and possessing prior to other things the divine peculiarity. The divine genus, therefore, subsists corporeally, psychically, and intellectually. And it is evident that all these are divine according to participation. For that which is primarily divine subsists in the unities. Hence, the participants of the divine unities originate indeed from being, but end in a corporeal nature. End of Proposition 139. Propositions 140 to 159 of the Elements of Theology by Proclus, translated by Thomas Taylor. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Proposition 140. All the powers of divine natures, having a supernal origin and proceeding through appropriate media, extend as far as to the last of things, and to places about the earth. For neither does anything intercept these powers, and exclude them from being present with all things. For they are not in want of places and intervals, on account of their unrestrained transcendency with respect to all things, and a presence everywhere unmingled. Nor is that which is adapted to participate of them prohibited from participation. But as soon as anything is prepared for participation, they also are present, neither then approaching, nor prior to this being absent, but always possessing an invariable sameness of subsistence. If, therefore, any terrene nature is adapted to the participation of these divine powers, they are present with it, and fill all things with themselves. And indeed, they are in a greater degree present with superior natures, but they are present with those of a middle nature according to the order which they possess. And with such natures as are last, they are present in an ultimate degree. From on high, therefore, they extend themselves as far as to the last of things. Hence also, in last natures, there are representations of such as are first, and all things sympathize with all. Secondary indeed, pre-existing in first natures, but first natures presenting themselves to the view in such as are second. For everything subsists in a threefold manner, either according to cause, or according to hyparxis, or according to participation. PROPOSITION CXLI. Every providence of the Gods is twofold, one indeed being exempt from the natures for which it provides, but the other being coarranged with them. For some divine essences indeed, according to hyparxis and the peculiarity of their order, are entirely expanded above the illuminated natures, but others, being of the same order, provide for things subordinate that are of the same coordination, these also imitating the providential energy of the exempt Gods, and desiring to fill secondary natures with the good which they are able to impart. PROPOSITION CXLII. The Gods are present with all things after the same manner, but all things are not after the same manner present with the Gods, but everything participates of their presence according to its own order and power. And this is accomplished by some things uniformly, but by others manifoldly, by some things eternally, but by others according to time, and by some things incorporeally, but by others corporeally. For it is necessary that the different participation of the same things should become different, either from the participant or from that which is participated. But everything divine always possesses the same order, and is without habitude to, and unmingled with all things. It remains therefore that the mutation must subsist from the participants, and that in these, that which is not invariably the same must be found, and that at different times they are differently present with the Gods. Hence, the Gods being present with all things, with invariable sameness, all things are not after the same manner present with them, but other things are present with them as far as they are able, and according to the manner in which they are present, they enjoy their illuminations. For the participation is according to the measure of the presence of the divinities. PROPOSITION CXLIII. All inferior natures fail before the presence of the Gods, though that which participates of them may be adapted to participation. Everything foreign indeed from divine light becomes far removed from it, but all things are illuminated at once by the Gods. For divine natures are always more comprehensive and more powerful than the things which proceed from them, but the inaptitude of the participants becomes the cause of the privation of divine illumination, for this inaptitude obscures it by its own imbecility, And this being obscured, something else appears to receive dominion, not according to its own power, but according to the imbecility of the participant, which seems to rise against the divine form of the illumination. PROPOSITION CXLIV. All beings and all the distributions of beings extend as far in their progressions as the orders of the Gods. For the Gods produce beings in conjunction with themselves, nor is anything able to subsist and to receive measure and order external to the Gods, or beyond their influence. For all things are perfected through their power, and are arranged and measured by the Gods. Prior, therefore, to the last genera in beings, the Gods pre-exist, who also adorn these genera, and impart to them life, formation, and perfection, and convert them to the good. In a similar manner also, the Gods are prior to the middle and first genera of beings. And all things are bound and rooted in the Gods, and through this cause are preserved. But when anything apostatizes from, and becomes destitute of the Gods, it entirely departs into nonentity and vanishes, in consequence of being perfectly deprived of those natures by which it was contained. PROPOSITION CXLV. The peculiarity of every divine order pervades through all secondary natures, and imparts itself to all the subordinate genera of beings. For if beings proceed as far as the orders of the Gods extend in every genus of beings, there is a supernally illuminated peculiarity of the divine powers. For everything receives from its proximate appropriate cause the peculiarity according to which that cause is allotted its subsistence. I say, for instance, if there is a certain cathartic or purifying deity, there is also a purification in souls, in animals, in plants, and in stones. And in a similar manner, if there is a guardian, a convertive, a perfective, and a vivific power. And a stone indeed participates of the divine cathartic power in a corporeal manner only, but a plant participates it still more clearly according to life. An animal possesses this form according to impulse, the rational soul rationally, intellect intellectually, and the Gods superessentially and unically. The whole series also has the same power from one divine cause, and there is the same mode of reasoning with respect to the peculiarities of the other divine powers. For all things are suspended from the Gods, and different natures are illuminated by different Gods, every divine series extending as far as to the last of things. And some things indeed are suspended from the Gods immediately, but others through a greater or less number of media. But all things are full of Gods, and whatever anything naturally possesses, it derives from the Gods. PROPOSITION CXLVI. The ends of all the divine progressions are assimilated to their principles, preserving a circle without a beginning and without an end, through conversion to their principles. For if everything that has proceeded is converted to the proper principle from which it proceeded, much more will total orders having proceeded from their summit be again converted to it. But the conversion of the end to the beginning renders the whole order one, definite, and converging to itself, and exhibiting through the convergency that which has the form of the one in the multitude. PROPOSITION CXLVII. The summits of all the divine orders are assimilated to the ends of the natures proximately situated above them. For if it is necessary that there should be an uninterrupted connection of the divine progression, and that each order should be bound together by appropriate media, it is necessary that the summits of secondary should be conjoined with the terminations of first orders. But this contact is through similitude. Hence, there will be a similitude of the principles of an inferior to the ends of a proximately superior order. PROPOSITION CXLVIII. Every divine order is united to itself in a threefold manner: from the summit which is in it, from its middle, and from its end. For the summit, possessing a power which is most single, transmits union to all the series, and unites the whole of it supernally abiding in itself. But the middle, extending to both the extremes, binds together the whole order about itself, transmitting indeed the gifts of primary divine natures, but extending the powers of such as are last, and inserting communion in all of them, and a conjunction with each other. For thus the whole order becomes one, from natures that replenish and those that are filled, converging to the middle as to a certain centre, and the end again returning to the beginning and recalling the proceeding powers, imparts similitude and convergency to the whole order. And thus the whole order is one through the unific power of primary natures, through the connection existing in the middle, and through the conversion of the end to the principle of the progressions. PROPOSITION CXLIX. Every multitude of the divine unities is bounded according to number. For if this multitude is most near to the one, it will not be infinite. For the infinite is not connascent with, but foreign from the one. Indeed, if multitude is of itself, or in its own nature separated from the one, it is evident that infinite multitude is perfectly destitute of it. Hence it is powerless and inefficacious. The multitude of the Gods, therefore, is not infinite. Hence it has the form of the one, and is finite, and is more finite than every other multitude. For it is nearer to the one than all other multitude. If, therefore, the principle of things was multitude, it would be necessary that what is nearer to the principle should be a greater multitude than what is more remote from it. For that which is nearer to anything is more similar to it. Since, however, that which is first is the one, the multitude which is conjoined with it is a less multitude than that which is more remote from it. But the infinite is not a less, but is the greatest possible multitude. PROPOSITION CL. Everything which proceeds in the divine orders is not naturally adapted to receive all the powers of its producing cause. Nor, in short, are secondary natures able to receive all the powers of the natures prior to themselves. But the latter have certain powers exempt from things in an inferior order, and incomprehensible by the beings posterior to themselves. For if the peculiarities of the Gods differ from each other, those of the subordinate pre-exist in the superior divinities, but those of the superior, being more total, are not in the subordinate. But more excellent natures impart indeed some things to their progeny, but antecedently assume others in themselves in an exempt manner. For it has been demonstrated that those Gods who are nearer to the One are more total, and those more remote from it more partial. But if the more total have powers comprehensive of the more partial, those that have a secondary and more partial order will not comprehend the power of the more total Gods. In the superior, therefore, there is something incomprehensible and uncircumscribed by the inferior orders. For each of the divine orders is truly infinite. Nor is that which is infinite, as has been demonstrated, infinite to itself, nor much less to things above itself, but to all the natures posterior to itself. But infinite in these last is incapacity. The infinite, however, is incomprehensible by those natures to which it is infinite. Subordinate natures, therefore, do not participate of all the powers which more excellent natures antecedently comprehend in themselves, for the latter are incomprehensible by the former. Hence, things of a secondary nature, from their more partial subsistence, will neither possess all the powers of more excellent beings, nor will they possess the powers which they do contain after the same manner as superior natures, on account of that infinity through which the latter transcend the former. PROPOSITION CLI. Everything paternal in the Gods is of a primary nature, and is pre-established in the rank of the good, according to all the divine orders. For it produces the hyparxes of secondary natures, and total powers, and essences, according to one ineffable transcendency. Hence also it is denominated paternal, in consequence of exhibiting the united and boniform power of the One, and the cause which gives subsistence to secondary natures. And according to each order of the Gods, the paternal genus ranks as the leader, producing all things from itself, and adorning them as being arranged analogous to the good. And of divine fathers, some are more total, but others are more partial, just as the orders themselves of the Gods differ by the more total and the more partial, according to the reason of cause. As many, therefore, as are the progressions of the Gods, so many also are the differences of fathers. For if there is that which is analogous to the good in every order, it is necessary that there should be the paternal in all the orders, and that each order should proceed from the paternal union. PROPOSITION CLII. Every thing which is generative in the Gods proceeds according to the infinity of divine power, multiplying itself, proceeding through all things, and transcendently exhibiting the never failing in the progressions of secondary natures. For to multiply things which proceed, and to produce things into progeny, from the occult comprehension in causes, of what else is it the prerogative, than of the infinite power of the Gods, through which all divine natures are filled with prolific good? For every thing which is full produces other things from itself according to a superplenary power. The domination of power, therefore, is the peculiarity of generative deity, which multiplies the powers of the things generated, and renders them prolific, and excites them to generate and give subsistence to other things. For if every thing imparts the appropriate peculiarity which it possesses primarily to other things, every thing which is prolific will impart progression, and will adumbrate the infinity which is the primary leader of wholes, from which every generative power proceeds, and which in an exempt manner pours forth the ever-flowing progressions of divine natures. Proposition 153. Everything which is perfect in the Gods is the cause of divine perfection. For, as the hypostases of beings are of one kind, but those of superessential natures of another, so likewise with respect to perfections, those of the Gods themselves, according to hyparxis, are different from those of beings which are secondary and posterior to them. And the former indeed are self-perfect and primary, because the good subsists primarily in them, but the latter possess perfection according to participation. Hence the perfection of the Gods is one thing, and that of deified natures is another. The perfection, however, which is primarily in the Gods, is not only the cause of perfection to deified natures, but also to the Gods themselves. For if everything, so far as it is perfect, is converted to its proper principle, that which is the cause of all divine conversion is the perfective genus of the Gods. Proposition 154. Every thing which is of a guardian nature in the Gods preserves every thing in its proper order, and is uniformly exempt from secondary, and established in primary natures. For if a guard immutably preserves the measure of the order of every thing, and connectedly contains all the natures that are guarded in their appropriate perfection, it will impart to all things a transcendency exempt from subordinate beings, and will firmly establish each thing unmingled, in itself existing as the cause of undefiled purity to the natures that are guarded, and fixing them in superior beings. For everything is perfect which adheres to primary natures, but is in itself alone, and is expanded above things subordinate. Proposition 155. Everything vivific in the Gods is a generative cause, but every generative cause is not vivific. For a generative is more total than a vivific cause, and is nearer to the principle of all things. For generation manifests a cause which produces beings into multitude. But vivification represents to us the Deity who is the supplier of all life. If therefore the former multiplies the hypostases of beings, but the latter gives subsistence to the progressions of life, if this be the case, as being is to life, so is the generative order to the vivific series. The former therefore will be more total, and the cause of a greater number of effects, and will on this account be nearer to the principle of all things. Proposition 156. Every cause of purity is comprehended in the guardian order. But on the contrary, not every thing of a guardian order is the same with the purifying genus. For purity imparts to all the Gods the unmingled with things inferior, and the undefiled in the providence of secondary natures. But a guardian power also effects this, and contains all things in itself, and firmly inserts them in superior natures. The guardian therefore is more total than the purifying genus. For in short, the peculiarity of the guardian power is to preserve the order of every thing the same with reference to itself, and to the natures prior and posterior to itself. But the peculiarity of purity is to keep more excellent natures exempt from such as are subordinate. These powers, however, primarily subsist in the Gods. For it is necessary that there should be one cause preceding that which is in all things, and in short, it is requisite that there should be uniform measures of all good, and that these should be comprehended by the Gods according to cause. For there is no good in secondary natures, which does not pre-exist in the Gods. Hence, in the divinities, purity is likewise a primary good, guardianship, and everything of this kind. PROPOSITION CLVII. Every paternal cause is the supplier of being to all things, and gives subsistence to the hyparxis of beings. But every thing which is fabricative of the production of form, exists prior to composite natures, and precedes their order and division according to number, and is also of the same coordination with the paternal cause in the more partial genera of things. For each of these belongs to the order of bound, since hyparxis also, number and form, have all of them the nature of bound. Hence, in this respect, they are coordinate with each other. But the demiurgic or fabricative cause indeed produces fabrication into multitude, and the uniform, or that which has the form of the one, supplies the progressions of beings. And the former indeed is the artificer of form, but the latter produces essence. So far therefore as these differ from each other, videre licet, form and being, so far also does the paternal differ from the demiurgic cause. But form is a certain being. Hence the paternal cause is more total and causal, and is beyond the demiurgic genus, in the same manner as being is beyond form. PROPOSITION CLVIII. Every elevating cause in the Gods differs both from a purifying cause and from the convertive genera. For it is evident that this cause also has necessarily a primary subsistence in the Gods, since all the causes of total good pre-exist in the divinities. But it subsists prior to the purifying cause. For the one liberates from things of a subordinate nature, but the other conjoins with more excellent natures. The elevating, however, has a more partial order than the convertive cause. For every thing which converts is converted either to itself, or to that which is more excellent than itself. But the energy of the elevating cause is characterized by a conversion to that which is more excellent, as leading that which is converted to a superior and more divine cause. PROPOSITION CLIX. Every order of the Gods consists of the first principles, bound and infinity. But one order is in a greater degree derived from bound, and another from infinity. For every order proceeds from both these, because the communications of first causes pervade through all secondary natures. But in some things bound predominates in the mixture of bound and infinity, and in others infinity. And thus the genus which has the form of bound has its completion, in which the prerogatives of bound have dominion. This too is the case with the genus which has the form of the infinite, and in which the properties of infinity predominate. End of proposition 159. Propositions 160 to 179 of the Elements of Theology by Proclus, translated by Thomas Taylor. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Proposition 160. Concerning intellect. Every divine intellect is uniform, or has the form of the One, and is perfect, and the first intellect subsists from itself and produces other intellects. For if it is a God, it is filled with divine unities, and is uniform. But if this be the case, it is also perfect, being full of divine goodness. And if this be admitted, it is likewise primarily intellect, as being united to the Gods. But being primarily intellect, it also gives an hypostasis to other intellects. For all secondary natures obtain their hyparxis from such as have a primary subsistence. Proposition 161. Everything which is truly being, and is suspended from the Gods, is divine and imparticipable. For since that which is truly being is the first of the natures that participate of the divine union, it likewise fills intellect from itself. For intellect is being, as replete with being, and is therefore a divine intelligible. And so far indeed as it is deified, it is divine. But as filling intellect, and being participated by it, it is intelligible. Intellect also is being on account of that which is primarily being. But that which is primarily being itself is separate from intellect, because intellect is posterior to being. But imparticipables subsist prior to things which are participated. Hence being, which subsists by itself and is imparticipable, is prior to the being which is conjoined with intellect. For it is intelligible, not as co-arranged with intellect, but as perfecting intellect in an exempt manner, because it imparts being to it, and fills it with truly existing essence. Proposition 162. Every multitude of unities which illuminates truly existing being is occult and intelligible. Occult indeed, as being conjoined with unity, but intelligible as participated by being. For all the Gods are denominated from the things which are suspended from them, because from these it is possible to know their different hypostases, which are of themselves unknown. For everything divine is of itself ineffable and unknown, as being connascent with the ineffable one. From the difference, however, of the participants, it happens that the peculiarities of divine natures become known. The unities, therefore, which illuminate truly existing being are intelligible, because being truly so called is a divine intelligible and imparticipable, subsisting prior to intellect. For this would not be suspended from the first Gods, unless they also possessed a primary hypostasis, and a power perfective of other Gods, since, as participants are to each other, so likewise are the hyparxes of the things that are participated. Proposition 163. Every multitude of unities which is participated by imparticipable intellect is intellectual. For as intellect is to truly existing being, so are these unities to the intelligible unities. Since therefore the latter, which illuminate being, are intelligible, hence the former, which illuminate a divine and imparticipable intellect are intellectual. Yet they are not intellectual in such a way as if they subsisted in intellect, but as causally existing prior to intellect and generating intellect. Proposition 164. Every multitude of unities which is participated by every imparticipable soul is supermundane. For, because imparticipable soul is primarily above the world, the Gods also which are participated by it are supermundane, having the same analogy to the intellectual and intelligible Gods, which soul has to intellect, and intellect to truly existing being. As therefore every soul is suspended from intellect, and intellect is converted to the intelligible, thus also the supermundane are suspended from the intellectual in the same manner as the intellectual from the intelligible Gods. Proposition 165. Every multitude of unities which is participated by a certain sensible body is mundane. For it illuminates the parts of the world through intellect and soul as media. For intellect is not present with any mundane body without soul, nor are deity and soul conjoined without a medium, since participations are through similars. Intellect itself also, according to its intelligible summit, participates of unity. These unities, therefore, are mundane, as giving completion to the whole world, and as deifying visible bodies. For each of these is divine, not on account of soul, for soul is not primarily a God, nor on account of intellect, for intellect is not the same with the One. But each of these visible bodies is animated indeed on account of soul, and moved of itself. But it possesses a perpetual sameness of subsistence, and is moved in the most excellent order on account of intellect. It is, however, divine on account of union. And if it possesses a providential power, it possesses it through this cause. Proposition 166. Every intellect is either imparticipable or participable, and if participable, it is either participated by supermundane or by mundane souls. For imparticipable intellect, having the first order, is the leader of every multitude of intellects. But of participable intellects, some illuminate supermundane and imparticipable soul, but others the mundane soul. For the mundane multitude is not immediately derived from the imparticipable, since progressions are through similars. But that which is separate from the world is more similar to the imparticipable than that which is divided about it. Nor has a supermundane multitude alone a subsistence, but there are also mundane intellects, since there is likewise a mundane multitude of Gods, and the world itself is animated, and at the same time intellectual. The participation also of the supermundane Gods by mundane souls is through mundane intellects as the media. Proposition 167. Every intellect intellectually perceives itself, but the first intellect indeed perceives itself alone, and in this intellect and the intelligible are one in number. But each of the subsequent intellects perceives itself, and the natures prior to itself, and the intelligible to each of these is partly that which it is, and partly that from which it is derived. For every intellect either intellectually perceives itself, or that which is above, or that which is posterior to itself. But if indeed it perceives that which is posterior to itself, it will through intellect be converted to that which is less excellent than itself, and thus will not know that to which it is converted, as not being in itself, but external to itself. But it will only know the image of this thing, as being generated in itself from it. For it knows that which it possesses, and the manner in which it is affected, but not that which it does not possess, and by which it is not affected. But if it perceives that which is above itself, if indeed this is accomplished through the knowledge of itself, it will at one and the same time both know itself and that superior nature. But if it knows that alone, it will be ignorant of itself, though it is intellect. In short, by knowing that which is prior to itself, it will know that it is a cause, and will also know the things of which it is the cause. For if it is ignorant of these, it will likewise be ignorant of that which is the cause of them, not knowing that which produces what it produces, by its very being, and what the things are which it does produce. Hence, by knowing the things of which it is the cause, it will also know itself, as deriving its subsistence from thence. By knowing, therefore, that which is prior to itself, it will likewise entirely know itself. Hence, if there is a certain intelligible intellect, this, by knowing itself, will also know the intelligible, being itself intelligible. But each of the intellects posterior to this will intellectually perceive the intelligible which is in itself, and at the same time that which is prior to itself. Hence, in intellect there is the intelligible, and in the intelligible, intellect. But one intellect is the same with the intelligible, and another is the same with the intelligible which is in itself, but is not the same with the intelligible prior to itself. For that which is simply intelligible is one thing, and the intelligible in that which intellectually perceives is another. PROPOSITION CLXVIII. Every intellect knows in energy that which it intellectually perceives, and it is not the peculiarity of one part of it to perceive, and of another to perceive that it perceives. For if it is intellect in energy, and perceives itself as not anything different from the object of intellectual perception, it will know itself and see itself. But seeing that which perceives intellectually, and knowing that which sees, it will know that it is intellect in energy. But knowing this, it will know that it perceives intellectually, and will not alone know the objects of its intellection. Hence it will at once both know the intelligible, and that it intellectually perceives it, and by intellection it will be intellectually perceived by itself. PROPOSITION CLXIX. Every intellect has its essence, power, and energy in eternity. For if it intellectually perceives itself, and intellect is the same with the intelligible, intelligence also is the same with intellect and the intelligible. For being the medium between that which intellectually perceives, and the object of intellectual perception, and these being the same, intelligence also will be the same with both. Moreover, that the essence of intellect is eternal is evident. For the whole of it subsists at once. And this being the case, intelligence also will be eternal, since it is the same with the essence of intellect. But if intellect is eternal, it will not be measured by time, neither according to its being, nor its energy. But these subsisting with invariable sameness, the power also of intellect will be eternal. PROPOSITION CXC. Every intellect at once intellectually perceives all things, but imparticipable intellect indeed simply perceives all things, and each of the intellects posterior to it perceives all things according to one. For if every intellect establishes its essence in eternity, and together with its essence its energy, it will intellectually perceive all things at once. For to every thing which is not established in eternity, the successive objects of its perception subsist according to parts. For everything which is successive is in time, the successive consisting of prior and posterior, but the whole of it not existing at once. If therefore all intellects similarly perceive all things, they will not differ from each other. For if they perceive all things similarly, they are similarly all things, since they are the very things which they intellectually perceive. But being similarly all things, one intellect will not be imparticipable, and another not, for their essences are the same things as the objects of their intellection, since the intellection of each is the same with the being of each, and each is both intellection and essence. It remains therefore either that each intellect does not similarly perceive all things, but one thing or more than one, but not all things at once, or that it perceives all things according to one. To assert, however, that each intellect does not perceive all things, is to make intellect to be ignorant of some particular being. For if it suffers transition in its energy, and intellectually perceives, not at once, but according to prior and posterior, at the same time possessing an immovable nature, it will be inferior to soul, which understands all things in being moved, or in immutable energy, because intellect, on this hypothesis, will only understand one thing by its permanent energy. It will therefore understand all things according to one, for it either intellectually perceives all things, or one thing, or all things according to the one of intellection. For in all intellects indeed, there is always an intellectual perception of all things, yet so as to bound all things in one of all. Hence there is something predominant in intellection, and the objects of intellection, since all things are at once understood as one, through the domination of one, which characterizes all things with itself. PROPOSITION CLXXI. Every intellect is an impartible essence. For if it is without magnitude, incorporeal and immovable, it is impartible. For every thing which in any way whatever is partible, is either partible on account of magnitude, or multitude, or on account of energies which are borne along with the flux of time. But intellect is eternal according to all things, and is beyond bodies, and the multitude which is in it is united. It is therefore impartible. That intellect also is incorporeal is manifest from its conversion to itself. For no body is converted to itself. But that it is eternal, the identity of its energy with its essence evinces. For this has been before demonstrated. And that the multitude in it is united is evident from the continuity of intellectual multitude with the divine unities. For these are the first multitude, but intellects are next to these. Hence, though every intellect is a multitude, yet it is an united multitude. For, prior to that which is divided, that which is collected into profound union and is nearer to the one subsists. PROPOSITION CLXXII. Every intellect is proximately the producing cause of beings perpetual and immutable according to essence. For everything which is produced by an immovable cause is immutable according to essence. But immovable intellect, being all things eternally, and abiding in eternity, produces by its very being that which it produces. If, however, it always is, and is invariably the same, it always produces, and after the same manner. Hence, it is not the cause of things which sometimes have existence, and at other times not, but it is the cause of things which always exist. PROPOSITION CLXXIII. Every intellect is intellectually both the things which are prior and posterior to itself. For it is those things which are posterior to itself according to cause, but those things which are prior to itself according to participation. Yet it is still intellect, and is allotted an intellectual essence. Hence it defines all things according to its essence, both such as are according to cause, and such as are according to participation. For everything participates of more excellent beings in such a way as it is naturally adapted to participate, and not according to their subsistence. For otherwise they would be similarly participated by all things. Participations, therefore, are according to the peculiarity and power of the participants. Hence, in intellect, the natures prior to it subsist intellectually. But intellect is likewise intellectually the things posterior to itself. For it does not consist of its effects, nor does it contain these, but the causes of these in itself. But intellect is by its very being the cause of all things, and the very being of it is intellectual. Hence it contains intellectually the causes of all things, so that every intellect possesses all things intellectually, both such as are prior, and such as are posterior to it. As therefore every intellect contains intelligibles intellectually, so likewise it contains sensibles intellectually. PROPOSITION CLXXIV. Every intellect gives subsistence to things posterior to itself by intellection, and its fabrication consists in intellection, and its intellection or intelligence in fabrication. For if intelligible and intellect are the same, the essence also of every intellect will be the same with the intellection in itself. But it produces that which it produces by essence, and produces according to the very being which it is. By intellection, therefore, it will produce the things which are produced. For in intellect, being and intellection are both of them one. For intellect is the same with every being which it contains. If, therefore, it makes by its very being, but its very being is intellection, it makes by intellection. Intelligence also, which is in energy, consists in intellection. But this is the same with the essence of intellect, and the essence of intellect consists in producing. For that which produces immovably always possesses its very being in producing. The intelligence of intellect, therefore, consists in fabrication or production. Proposition 175. Every intellect is primarily participated by those natures which are intellectual, both according to essence and according to energy. For it is necessary that it should either be participated by these, or by other natures, which possess indeed an intellectual essence, but do not always energize intellectually. It is, however, impossible that it should be participated by the latter of these, for the energy of intellect is immovable. And hence the natures by which it is participated always participate of intellectual energy, which always causes the participants of it to be intellectual. For that which possesses its energy in a certain part of time is unadapted to be conjoined with an eternal energy, but that which has perfection according to the whole of time is the medium between every eternal energy, and that which is perfect in a certain time, as well in the mutations of energy as in essences. For progressions are never effected without a medium, but through kindred and similar natures, both according to hypostases and the perfections of energies. After a similar manner, therefore, every intellect is primarily participated by those beings that are able to perceive intellectually, according to the whole of time, and who always energize intellectually, though their intellection is in time, and is not eternally in energy. Corollary. From this, therefore, it is evident that it is impossible for the soul, which sometimes perceives intellectually and sometimes does not, to participate proximately of intellect. Proposition 176. All intellectual forms are in each other, and each is at the same time separate and distinct from the rest. For if every intellect is impartible, and the multitude which is in it is united through intellectual impartibility, all things in it will be in one, impartibles will be united to each other, and all intellectual forms will pervade through all. But if all intellectual forms subsist immaterially and incorporeally, they are unconfused with each other and separate, and each preserving its own purity, remains that which it is. The peculiar participation, however, of each participating in a separate manner, manifests the unconfused nature of intellectual forms. For unless the forms which are participated were distinguished separate from each other, the participants of each of them would not participate in a separate manner, but in the subordinate natures, i.e., in the participants, there would be in a much greater degree an indistinct confusion, these being according to their order of an inferior condition. For whence would there be a separation of these, if the natures which give subsistence to, and perfect them, were without distinction, and were confused together? But again, the impartible hypostasis and uniform essence of that which contains forms evinces their united nature. For things which have their hyparxes in the impartible and the uniform are impartibly in the same thing. For how can you divide the impartible and the one? Hence they have a simultaneous subsistence, and are in each other, each wholly pervading through the whole of each in a manner unaccompanied with interval. For that which comprehends them is not extended with interval, nor is one of them in this thing, but another elsewhere, as in that which has interval. But every thing is at once in the impartible and in one, so that all intellectual forms are in each other, and are in each other unitedly, and at the same time each is distinctly apart from each. Corollary. But if some one, in addition to these demonstrations, should require also examples, let him direct his attention to the theorems which exist in one soul. For all these are in the same essence, which is truly without magnitude, and are united to each other. For that which is without magnitude does not locally contain the things which are in it, but the natures which it contains are united and separated, impartibly and without interval. For the soul genuinely produces all things, and each apart from each, attracting nothing from the rest, which, unless they were always separated according to habit, would not be separated by the energy of the soul. PROPOSITION CLXXVII. Every intellect being a plenitude of forms, one indeed is comprehensive of more total, but another of more partial forms. And the superior intellects contain in a more total manner such things as those posterior to them contain more partially. But the inferior intellects contain more partially such things as those that are prior to them contain more totally. For the superior intellects employ greater powers, having more the form of the one than secondary intellects. But the inferior intellects, being more multiplied, diminish the powers which they contain. For things that are more allied to the one, being contracted in quantity, surpass the natures that are posterior to them. And on the contrary, things more remote from the one, as they are increased in quantity, are inferior to the natures that are nearer to the one. Hence, the superior intellects, being established according to a greater power, but being less in multitude, produce a greater number of effects according to power, through fewer things according to the quantity of forms. But the intellects posterior to them produce fewer effects through a greater number of things according to a defect of power. If, therefore, the former produce a greater number of effects through fewer things, the forms in them are more total; and if the latter produce fewer effects through a greater number of things, the forms in them are more partial. Corollary. Hence it happens that the natures which are generated from superior intellects according to one form, are produced in a divided manner from secondary intellects according to many ideas. And again, those natures which are produced by inferior intellects through many and distinct forms, are produced by superior intellects through fewer but more total forms. And that indeed which is a whole and common accedes supernally to all its participants, but that which is divided and peculiar accedes from secondary intellects. Hence, secondary intellects, by the more partial separation of peculiarities, accurately and subtly distinguish the formations of primary intellects. PROPOSITION CLXXVIII. Every intellectual form gives subsistence to eternal natures. For if every intellectual form is eternal and immovable, it is essentially the cause of immutable and eternal hypostases, but not of such as are generated and corrupted. So that every thing which subsists according to an intellectual form is an eternal intellectual nature. For if all forms produce things posterior to themselves by their very being, but their essence possesses an invariable sameness of subsistence, the things produced by them will also be invariably the same, and will be eternal. Hence, neither the genera which subsist from a formal cause, according to a certain time, nor corruptible natures, so far as they are corruptible, have a pre-existent intellectual form. For they would be incorruptible and unbegotten if they derived their hypostasis from intellectual forms. Proposition 179. Every intellectual number is bounded. For if there is another multitude posterior to this, essentially inferior to it, and thus more remote from the one, but the intellectual number is nearer to the one, and if that which is nearer to the one is less according to quantity, but that which is more remote from it is more according to quantity, if this be the case, the intellectual number also will be less than every multitude posterior to it. Hence it is not infinite. The multitude of intellects, therefore, is bounded. For that which is less than a certain thing is not infinite, because the infinite, so far as infinite, is not less than any thing. End of Proposition 179. Propositions 180 to 199 of the Elements of Theology by Proclus. Translated by Thomas Taylor. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Proposition 180. Every intellect is a whole, so far as each consists of parts, and is united to other things, and at the same time separated from them. But imparticipable intellect indeed is simply a whole as containing all parts in itself totally. But each partial intellect possesses the whole as in a part, and thus is all things partially. For if a partial intellect is all things according to one, but a subsistence according to one thing is nothing else than a subsistence partially, the whole is in each of these intellects partially, being defined according to a certain one particular thing which predominates in all of them. Proposition 181. Every participated intellect is either divine, as being suspended from the gods, or is intellectual only. For if a divine and imparticipable intellect has a primary subsistence, the intellect which is allied to this is not that which differs from it in both respects, videre licet, which is neither divine nor imparticipable. For things which are dissimilar in both these respects cannot be conjoined with each other. It is evident, therefore, that the medium between these is partly similar to that which is primarily intellect, and partly dissimilar to it. Either, therefore, it is imparticipable and not divine, or it is participated and divine. But everything imparticipable is divine, as being allotted an order in multitude analogous to the one. Hence there will be a certain intellect which is divine, and at the same time participated. It is necessary, however, that there should be an intellect which does not participate of the divine unities, but intellectually perceives them only. For in each series, such things as are first, and which are conjoined with their monad, are able to participate of things proximately situated in a superior order. But such as are far distant from the primary monad cannot be suspended from the natures that proximately belong to a higher order. There is, therefore, both a divine intellect and an intellect which is intellectual only. The latter indeed being established according to an intellectual peculiarity, which it possesses from its own monad, and from imparticipable intellect, but the former subsisting according to the union which it receives from the participated monad. Proposition 182. every divine participated intellect is participated by divine souls. For if participation assimilates the participant to that which is participated, and renders the former connascent with the latter, it is evident that the participant of a divine intellect must be a divine soul, as being suspended from a divine intellect, and that through intellect as a medium it must participate of the deity which it contains. For deity conjoins the soul which participates of it with intellect, and binds that which is divine to that which is divine. PROPOSITION CLXXXIII. Every intellect which is participated indeed, but is intellectual alone, is participated by souls, which are neither divine, nor subsisting in a mutation from intellect into a privation of intellect. For neither are divine souls of this kind, nor such as participate of intellect. For souls participate of the Gods through a divine intellect, as was before demonstrated. Nor are souls which admit of mutation of this kind. For every intellect is participated by natures, which are always intellectual, both according to essence and according to energy. For this is evident from what has been before shown. PROPOSITION CLXXXIV. Concerning soul. Every soul is either divine, or is changed from intellect into a privation of intellect, or always remains as a medium between these, but is inferior to divine souls. For if a divine intellect indeed is participated by divine souls, but an intellectual intellect by those souls alone which are neither divine, nor receive a mutation from intelligence into a privation of intellect, for there are souls of this kind which sometimes perceive intellectually, and sometimes do not. If this be the case, it is evident that there are three genera of souls, and the first of these indeed are divine, but the second are not divine, yet always participate of intellect, and the third are those which are sometimes changed into an intellectual condition, and sometimes into a privation of intellect. PROPOSITION CLXXXV. All divine souls are indeed Gods psychically, but all those that participate of an intellectual intellect are the perpetual attendants of the Gods, and all those that are the recipients of mutation are sometimes only the attendants of the Gods. For if some souls have divine light supernally shining upon them, but others are endued with perpetual intelligence, and others again only sometimes participate of this perfection, if this be the case, the first of these will among the multitude of souls be analogous to the Gods, but the next to these will always follow the Gods, in consequence of always energizing according to intellect, and will be suspended from divine souls, having the same relation to them as that which is intellectual to that which is divine. And the souls which sometimes energize intellectually and follow the Gods, neither participate of intellect after a manner always the same, nor are always able to be converted to the intelligible in conjunction with divine souls. For that which sometimes only participates of intellect cannot by any contrivance whatever be always conjoined with the Gods. PROPOSITION CLXXXVI. Every soul is both an incorporeal essence and separate from body. For if it knows itself, but everything which knows itself is converted to itself, and that which is converted to itself does not pertain to body, since every body is without conversion to itself, nor is inseparable from body, since that which is inseparable from body is not naturally adapted to revert to itself, as it would thus be separated from body. If this be the case, every soul is neither a corporeal essence, nor inseparable from body. Moreover, that the soul knows itself is evident. For if it knows the natures that are above itself, and is also naturally adapted to know itself, it will in a much greater degree know itself from the causes prior to itself. PROPOSITION CLXXXVII. Every soul is indestructible and incorruptible. For everything which can in any way whatever be dissolved and destroyed is either corporeal and a composite, or is allotted its hypostasis in a subject. And that indeed which is dissolved is corrupted as consisting of many things, but that which is naturally adapted to be in another thing vanishes into nonentity when separated from its subject. Moreover, the soul is incorporeal, and external to every subject, subsisting in itself, and being converted to itself. Hence it is indestructible and incorruptible. PROPOSITION CLXXXVIII. Every soul is both life and vital. For that to which soul accedes necessarily lives, and that which is deprived of soul is immediately left destitute of life. Either therefore it lived through soul, or through something else, and not through soul. It is however impossible that it should have lived through something else alone. For everything which is participated either imparts itself, or something pertaining to itself, to its participant. But if it suffers neither of these, it will not be participated. Soul, however, is participated by that to which it is present, and that which participates of soul is said to be animated. If therefore that which is participated introduces life to animated natures, it is either life, or vital alone, or both life and vital. If however it is alone vital, but not also life, it will consist of life and non-life. It will not therefore know itself, nor be converted to itself. For knowledge is life, and the Gnostic power, so far as it is such, is vital. If therefore there is anything in soul without life, this will not possess essentially the power of knowing. But if soul is life alone, it will no longer participate of the intellectual life. For the participant of life is vital, and is not life alone, i.e., the first and imparticipable life. But the life which is posterior to this is both vital and life. Soul, however, is not imparticipable life, and hence it is at the same time both life and vital. PROPOSITION CLXXXIX. Every soul is self-vital. For if it is converted to itself, but everything which is converted to itself is self-subsistent, the soul also is self-subsistent and produces itself. But it is likewise life and vital, and its hyparxis is according to vitality. For it imparts life by its very being to the natures to which it is present, and if the participant is adapted, it immediately becomes animated and vital, soul in effecting this not reasoning, nor acting from deliberate choice, nor vivifying by cogitation and judgment, but by its very essence, and by that which it is, supplying the participant with life. Hence the being of soul is the same as to live. If therefore the soul possesses being from itself, and this is the same as to live, and it has life essentially, if this be the case, it will impart life to itself, and will possess it from itself. And this being admitted, soul will be self-vital. PROPOSITION CXC. every soul is a medium between impartible natures and the natures which are divisible about bodies. For if soul is self-vital and self-subsistent, and has an hyparxis separate from bodies, it is, in consequence of being more excellent than, exempt from everything divisible about body. For the natures which are divided about bodies are entirely inseparable from their subjects, being co-distributed with divisible bulks. They also depart from themselves and their own impartibility, and are co-extended with bodies. And though they subsist in lives, yet these are not the lives of themselves, but of participants. Though likewise they exist in essence and in forms, yet they are not the forms of themselves, but of those things which are fashioned by forms. If therefore soul is not these, it is a self-subsistent essence, a self-vital life, and a knowledge gnostic of itself. Hence it is entirely separate from bodies, but is a participant of life. If however this be the case, it also participates of essence, but it likewise participates of knowledge from other causes. It is evident therefore that it is inferior to impartible natures, because it is filled with life externally. But if with life, it is evident that it is also externally filled with essence. For imparticipable life and imparticipable essence are prior to soul. That soul, however, is not primarily gnostic is evident. For every soul indeed, so far as soul is life, but not every soul so far as it is soul, possesses knowledge. For a certain soul, while it remains soul, is ignorant of real beings. Soul, therefore, is not primarily gnostic, nor does it possess knowledge from its very being. Hence it has an essence secondary to those natures that are primarily, and by their very being, gnostic. Since, however, the essence of soul is divided from its knowledge, soul does not belong to natures entirely impartible. But it has been demonstrated that neither does it rank among the natures that are divisible about bodies. Hence it is a medium between both. PROPOSITION CXCI. Every participable soul has indeed an eternal essence, but its energy is accompanied with time. For either it possesses both eternally, or both temporally, or the one eternally, but the other temporally. It cannot, however, possess both eternally, for it would be an impartible essence, and the nature of soul would in no respect differ from an intellectual hypostasis, videre licet, a self-motive from an immovable nature. Nor can it possess both temporally, for thus it would be generated alone, and would neither be self-vital nor self-subsistent. For nothing which is essentially measured by time is self-subsistent. But soul is self-subsistent, for that which is converted to itself according to energy is also essentially converted to itself, and proceeds from itself. It remains therefore that every soul is partly eternal and partly participates of time. Either therefore it is essentially eternal, but participates of time according to energy, or vice versa. The latter, however, is impossible. Hence every participable soul is allotted an eternal essence, but a temporal energy. PROPOSITION CXCII. Every participable soul ranks among the number of truly existing beings, and is the first of generated natures. For if it is essentially eternal, it is truly being according to its hyparxis, and always is. For that which participates of eternity, participates likewise of perpetual existence. But if it is in time according to energy, it is generated. For everything which participates of time, since it is always becoming to be, or rising into existence, according to the prior and posterior of time, and is not at once that which it is wholly generated. But if every soul is in a certain respect generated according to energy, it will be the first of generated natures. For that which is in every respect generated is more remote from eternal natures. PROPOSITION CXCIII. Every soul subsists proximately from intellect. For if it has an immutable and eternal essence, it proceeds from an immovable essence. For that which proceeds from a movable essence is essentially changed in every respect. The cause, therefore, of every soul is immovable. But if it proximately subsists from intellect, it is perfected by, and converted to intellect. And if it participates of the knowledge which intellect imparts to the natures that are able to partake of it, for all knowledge is derived from intellect, and all things have their progression essentially from that to which they are naturally converted. If this be the case, every soul proceeds from intellect. PROPOSITION CXCIV. Every soul contains all the forms which intellect primarily possesses. For if it proceeds from intellect, and intellect gives subsistence to soul, and if intellect, subsisting immovably, produces all things by its very being, it will also impart to soul which it fabricates the essential reasons or producing principles of all things which it contains. For everything which produces by its very being imparts secondarily to the thing generated by it that which it is itself primarily. The soul, therefore, contains secondarily the representations of intellectual forms. PROPOSITION CXCV. Every soul is all things, containing indeed sensibles paradigmatically, or after the manner of an exemplar, but intelligibles iconically, or after the manner of an image. For subsisting as a medium between impartible natures and such as are divisible about body, it produces and gives subsistence to the latter of these, but pre-establishes in itself the causes from which it proceeds. Those things, therefore, of which it is the pre-existent cause, it antecedently comprehends paradigmatically. But it possesses according to participation, and as the progeny of first natures, the causes of its subsistence. Hence, it antecedently comprehends according to cause all sensible natures, and contains the immaterial productive principles of things material, the incorporeal principles of things corporeal, and without interval, the principles of things which possess interval. But it contains intelligibles, and the forms of them after the manner of an image, so that it receives partably indeed impartibles, with multiplication unical natures, and in a self-motive manner things immovable. Hence it is all beings containing such as are first, according to participation, but paradigmatically such as are posterior to its own nature. PROPOSITION CXCVI. Every participable soul primarily uses a perpetual body, which possesses an unbegotten and incorruptible hypostasis. For if every soul is essentially eternal, and by its very being primarily animates some particular body, it will always animate this body. For the essence of every soul is immutable. But if this be the case, that which is animated by it is always animated, and always participates of life. That, however, which always lives, by a much greater priority always exists. But that which always is perpetual. Hence that which is primarily suspended from every soul is perpetual. But indeed, every participable soul is primarily participated by a certain body, since it is participable and not imparticipable, and animates its participant by its very being. Every participated soul, therefore, uses a body which is primarily perpetual, and essentially unbegotten and incorruptible. PROPOSITION CXCVII. Every soul is in essence vital and gnostic, and a life essential and gnostic, and is knowledge, essence, and life. All things likewise subsist in it at once, the essential, the vital, and the gnostic, and all things are in all, and each is separate from the rest. For if it is the medium between impartible forms and those which are divided about bodies, it is neither so impartible as all intellectual natures, nor so partible as corporeal forms. Since, therefore, essences, lives, and cognitions are divided in corporeal natures, these subsist in souls impartibly, unitedly, and incorporeally, and all of them exist at once, through their immateriality and impartibility. Since, likewise, in intellectual natures, all things subsist according to union, they are distinguished and divided in souls. All things, therefore, subsist together in these, and at the same time apart. But if all impartibles subsist together and in one, they pervade through each other, and if they are separate, they are again divided without confusion, so that each subsists by itself, and all are in all. For in the essence of soul there is both life and knowledge, since every soul would not know itself, if the essence of it was of itself deprived of life and knowledge. And in the life of the soul there are both essence and knowledge. For unessential life, and which is without knowledge, pertains to material lives, which are neither able to know themselves, nor are genuine essences. Knowledge also, which is unessential and without life, is without subsistence. For all knowledge belongs to that which is vital, and which is of itself allotted an essence. PROPOSITION CXCVIII. Everything which participates of time, and is always moved, is measured by periods. For since it is measured by time, the motion of it also participates of measure and bound, and proceeds according to number. But because it is always moved, and this always is not eternal but temporal, it is necessary that it should use periods. For motion indeed is a mutation from some things to others. But beings are terminated by multitude and magnitude. These, however, being bounded, there can neither be a mutation to infinity according to a right line, nor can that which is always moved make its transitions finitely. Hence that which is always moved will proceed from the same to the same, and thus will proceed periodically. PROPOSITION CXCIX. Every mundane soul uses periods of its proper life, and restitutions to its former state. For if it is measured by time, it energizes transitively, and possesses a peculiar motion. But everything which is moved and participates of time, if it is perpetual, uses periods, periodically revolves, and is restored from the same things to the same. And every mundane soul possessing motion and energizing according to time will have periods of motions and restitutions to its pristine state. For every period of perpetual natures is apokatastatic, or restorative to a former condition. End of proposition 199. Propositions 200 to 211 of the Elements of Theology by Proclus, translated by Thomas Taylor. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Proposition 200. Every period of soul is measured by time. The period of other souls, indeed, is measured by a certain time, but that of the first soul, since it is measured by time, is measured by the whole of time. For if all motions have prior and posterior, so likewise have periods, and on this account they participate of time. That also which measures all the periods of souls is time. But if indeed there were the same periods of all souls, and they were about the same things, the time of all would be the same. If, however, the restitutions of different souls are different, the periodic time also, and which restores to a pristine state, is different in different souls. That the soul, therefore, which is primarily measured by time, is measured by the whole of time, is evident. For if time is the measure of all motion, that which is primarily moved will entirely participate of time, and will be measured by the whole of time. For if the whole of time did not measure its first participant, it would not measure anything else, according to the whole of itself. From these things, however, it is evident that all souls are measured by certain measures which are more partial than the whole of time. For if these souls are more partial than the soul which primarily participates of time, neither can they adapt their periods to the whole of time. The multitude of their restitutions, however, will be parts of the one period, and of the one restitution of things to their pristine state, which is effected by the soul that primarily participates of time. For a more partial participation pertains to a less power, but a more total to a greater power. Other souls, therefore, are not naturally adapted to receive the whole temporal measure according to one life, because they are allotted an order inferior to that of the soul, which is first measured by time. Proposition 201. All divine souls have triple energies, some indeed as souls, but others as receiving a divine intellect, and others as suspended from the gods. And they provide indeed for the whole of things as gods, but they know all things through an intellectual life, and they move bodies through a self-moved hyparxis. For because they psychically participate of the natures situated above them, and are not simply souls, but divine souls, and are established according to an order in the psychical extent analogous to the gods, they energize not only psychically, but also divinely, being allotted a deified summit of their essence, and also because they have an intellectual hypostasis, through which they are spread under intellectual essences. Hence, they not only energize divinely, but also intellectually, the former indeed according to the one which they contain, but the latter through an energy established according to intellect. A third energy likewise is present with them, according to their own hyparxis, which is motive indeed of things naturally ultramotive, but is vivific of such as possess an adventitious life. For this is the proper employment of every soul, But such energies as are intellectual and providential they possess according to participation. PROPOSITION CCII. All souls attending upon and always following the Gods are inferior to divine, but are expanded above partial souls. For divine souls participating of intellect and deity, on which account they are at the same time both intellectual and divine, are the leaders of other souls, just as the Gods also are the leaders of all beings. But partial souls are deprived of a suspension from intellect, in consequence of not being able to participate proximately of an intellectual essence. For they would not fall from intellectual energy, if they essentially participated of intellect, as has been before demonstrated in proposition 184. Hence the souls which always follow the Gods are of a middle condition, receiving indeed a perfect intellect, and through this surpassing partial souls, yet not being suspended from the divine unities. For the intellect which they participate is not divine. PROPOSITION CCIII. Of every psychical multitude, divine souls indeed, being greater in power than other souls, are contracted according to number. But those that always follow divine souls have a middle order among all souls, both in power and quantity. And partial souls indeed are inferior in power to the others, but proceed into a greater number. For divine souls are more allied to the One on account of their hyparxis being divine, but souls of a middle rank through the participation of intellect, and those of the last order are essentially dissimilar both to those of the middle and those of the first rank. Among perpetual natures, however, those that are nearer to the One are more single in number, and are more contracted in multitude than such as are more remote from it. But such as are more remote from the One are more multiplied. The powers, therefore, of superior souls are greater, and have the same ratio to those of souls in the second rank, which the divine has to the intellectual, and the intellectual to the psychical peculiarity. Inferior souls also are more in number. For that which is more remote from the One is a greater, and that which is nearer to it is a less multitude. PROPOSITION CCIV. Every divine soul is the leader of many souls that always follow the Gods, and of a still greater number of such as sometimes receive this order. For if it is a divine soul, it is necessary that it should be allotted an order which is the leader or generator of all things, and which has a primary rank among souls. For in all beings, that which is divine is the leader of wholes. It is likewise requisite that every divine soul should neither alone preside over such souls as perpetually follow the Gods, nor over those alone that are sometimes their attendants. For if any divine soul should alone preside over those that sometimes follow the Gods, how can there be a contact between these and a divine soul, since they are entirely different from it, and neither proximately participate of intellect, nor much less of the Gods? But if it only presides over those that always follow the Gods, how is it that the series proceeds as far as to these alone? For thus intellectual natures will be the last, and will be unprolific, and unadapted to perfect and elevate. It is necessary, therefore, that such souls as follow the Gods, and energize according to intellect, and which are elevated to intellects more partial than divine intellects, should be primarily suspended from a divine soul. But it is necessary that partial souls, and which through those that are divine as media, participate of intellect and a divine life, should be suspended from a divine soul in the second place. For through those which always participate of a more excellent condition, those that sometimes only participate of it are perfected. And again, it is necessary that about every divine soul there should be a greater number of those that only sometimes follow, than of those that always attend on the Gods. For the power of the monad always proceeds into multitude according to diminution, being deficient indeed in power, but redundant in multitude. Since every soul also of those that always follow the Gods is the leader of a greater multitude of partial souls, imitating in this a divine soul, and elevates a greater number of souls to the primary monad of the whole series. Every divine soul, therefore, is the leader of many souls that always follow the Gods, but presides over a still greater number of those that sometimes only receive this order. PROPOSITION CCV. Every partial soul has the same ratio to the soul under which it is essentially arranged, as the vehicle of the one to the vehicle of the other. For if the distribution of vehicles to souls is according to nature, it is necessary that the vehicle of every partial soul should have the same ratio to the vehicle of the soul which ranks as a whole, as the essence of the one to the essence of the other. The distribution, however, is according to nature. For things which primarily participate are spontaneously conjoined with the natures which they participate. If, therefore, as a divine soul is to a divine body, so is a partial soul to a partial body, each soul essentially participating. If this be the case, that which was at first asserted is true, that the vehicles of souls have the same ratio to each other as the souls themselves, of which they are the vehicles. PROPOSITION CCVI. Every partial soul is able to descend infinitely into generation, and to ascend from generation to real being. For if it sometimes follows the Gods, but sometimes falls from an extension to a divine nature, and participates of intellect and the privation of intellect, it is evident that it is alternatively conversant with generation and the Gods. For since it is not for an infinite time with the Gods, it will not for the whole of the following time be conversant with bodies. For that which has not a temporal beginning will never have an end, and that which never has an end is necessarily without a beginning. It remains, therefore, that every partial soul must make periods of ascents from, and of descents into generation, and that this must be unceasing through an infinite time. Every partial soul, therefore, is able to descend and ascend infinitely, and this never ceases to be the case with all of them. PROPOSITION CCVII. The vehicle of every partial soul is fabricated by an immovable cause. For if it is perpetually and connascently suspended from the soul that uses it, being immutable according to essence, it is allotted its hypostasis from an immovable cause. For everything which is generated from movable causes is essentially changed. Moreover, every soul has a perpetual body, which primarily participates of it. Hence, the cause of a partial soul, and therefore of its vehicle, is immovable, and on this account supermundane. PROPOSITION CCVIII. The vehicle of every partial soul is immaterial, essentially indivisible, and impassive. For if it proceeds from an immovable fabrication, and is perpetual, it will have an immaterial and impassive hypostasis. For such things as are adapted to suffer essentially, and to be changed, are all of them material, and in consequence of subsisting differently at different times, are suspended from movable causes. Hence, likewise, they receive an all various mutation, being moved in conjunction with their principal causes. Moreover, that this vehicle is indivisible is manifest. For everything which is divided, so far as it is divided, is corrupted, in consequence of departing from the whole, and from its continuity. If, therefore, it is essentially immutable and impassive, it will be indivisible. PROPOSITION CCIX. The vehicle of every partial soul descends indeed with the addition of more material vestments, but becomes united to the soul by an ablation of everything material, and a recurrence to its proper form, analogous to the soul that uses it. For this soul indeed descends irrationally, assuming irrational lives, but it ascends, laying aside all the generation-producing powers with which it was invested in its descent, and becoming pure, returns to the pristine condition of its nature. For the vehicle imitates the lives of the souls that use it, and they being everywhere moved, it is moved in conjunction with them. By its circulations likewise it represents the intellections of some souls, but the falling of others through their inclination to the realms of generation, and the purifications of others through the circumductions which lead to an immaterial nature. For because it is vivified by the very essence of souls, and is connascent with them, it is all variously changed in conjunction with their energies, follows them everywhere, becomes copassive with them, is restored to its pristine state together with them when they are purified, and is elevated when they are elevated, and aspires after its own perfection. For everything is perfected when it obtains its proper perfection. PROPOSITION CCX. Every connascent vehicle of the soul always possesses both the same figure and magnitude, but it is seen to be greater and less, and of a dissimilar figure, through the additions and ablations of other bodies. For if it derives its essence from an immovable cause, it is evident that both its figure and its magnitude are defined by this cause, and each is immutable and invariable. Moreover, at different times it appears to be different, as likewise greater and less. Hence, through other bodies added from the material elements, and again taken away, it exhibits a different appearance both in quantity and form. PROPOSITION CCXI. Every partial soul descending into generation descends wholly, nor does one part of it remain on high, and another part descend. For if something pertaining to the soul remained on high in the intelligible world, it will always perceive intellectually, without transition or transitively. But if without transition, it will be intellect, and not a part of the soul, and this partial soul will proximately participate of intellect. This, however, is impossible. But if it perceives intellectually with transition from that which always, and from that which sometimes energizes intellectually, one essence will be formed. This, however, also is impossible. For these always differ, as has been demonstrated. To which may be added the absurdity resulting from supposing that the summit of the soul is always perfect, and yet does not rule over the other powers, and cause them to be perfect. Every partial soul, therefore, wholly descends. End of Proposition 211, and end of the Elements of Theology, by Proclus. Translated by Thomas Taylor. Sections 1 to 9 of On Providence and Fate, by Proclus. Translated by Thomas Taylor. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. On Providence and Fate, and that which is in our power, to Theodorus the Mechanist. 1. I am of opinion, my friend Theodorus, that the conceptions of your mind are mature, and adapted to a man who loves the contemplation of beings, and I am gratified that you have thought fit to write to us on these subjects, though there are many among you that are able to investigate and doubt with you about such like problems. But it is requisite, as it seems, that we also should adduce what appears to us to be the truth on the subjects which you have proposed for our discussion, and what we conceive to accord with things themselves, and with the opinions of the most celebrated of the philosophers prior to us, and that we should not in vain hear the inquiries of a man eminently skilled in mechanics, who was formerly known to us, as I conceive, and as you have asserted. You inquire, however, about things which have been 1,000 times investigated, and which, in my opinion, will never have any rest, because the soul is excited to the discussion of them, much light having been already thrown on them by the elaborate writings of Plotinus and Iamblichus, and prior to these by the divine Plato. And if it be not too much to say, such particulars respecting them have been proclaimed by the divinely inspired mouth of theologists, as Plato alone has unfolded by demonstrations. And why is it requisite to adduce to you Plato and men who were divinely wise, since they have been most luminously developed by the gods themselves, who transcendently know what pertains to themselves, and what they have produced, and have not been delivered by them in enigmas, as by theologists? It is requisite, therefore, that we also, writing conformably to them, should, as I have said, adduce to you what appears to us to be the truth respecting the subjects of your inquiry. 2. You deserve indulgence if, looking to the all various tragic and comic and other connections of human affairs, you have conceived that there is only one fabricator and maker of such colligations in the universe, and have called this Fate, or rather, you have denominated it the series and consequent generation of things, have thought that such a dramatic scene is alone directed by some inevitable necessity, and have celebrated this as Providence, and asserted that it alone possesses freedom of will, and is the lord of all things. But you have conceived that the freedom of will of the human soul is only a name, and is truly nothing, since she has an arrangement in the world, is subservient to the energies of other things, and is a part of the mundane fabric. Or rather, that I may use your own words, the human soul is a machine, since there is an irrefragable cause which moves all things that the world comprehends in itself. But the universe being as it were one machine, the whole spheres are complicated in each other analogously to certain drums, but the partial animals and souls that are moved by them, and in short all things, depend on one mover. And perhaps, in consequence of honoring your art, you have conceived that the maker of the universe is a certain mechanic, and that you are an imitator of the best of causes. These things, however, we have written, mingling the jocose with the serious. 3. Betaking ourselves, therefore, to the contest, we say that the difference of these three things ought especially to be considered by you, if you intend to arrive at the gate of the subjects of investigation. And of these, the first indeed is, that Providence and Fate do not differ in the way in which you conceive they do, viz. That the one is a connected consequence, but the other is necessity, the cause of this consequence. For both indeed are the causes of the world, and of whatever is produced in the world, but Providence subsists prior to Fate, and all that is produced according to Fate is by a much greater priority produced by Providence, but the contrary is not true. For in short, the natures which are governed by Providence are more divine than those which are governed by Fate. The second thing is this, that the soul which is separable from the body, and which descends into this mortal abode from the Gods, is different from the soul which is in bodies, and which subsists in, and is inseparable from its subjects, and that the latter essentially depends on Fate, but the former on Providence. The third particular is, that the science and truth which are inherent in souls conversant with generation, though they may lead an immaculate life, are different from the science and truth in souls that have fled from this abode, and are established in that place whence they first fell, and descended into the realms of mortality. Of these three particulars, therefore, as we have said, if you can discover sufficient solutions, you will obtain a satisfactory answer to your inquiries. For Providence, indeed, differing in the above-mentioned manner from Fate, it will be evident that many things escape Fate, but that nothing escapes Providence. That Providence supernally governs Fate, produces it, and has limited its empire by altermotive natures, viz. By things which are allotted their first subsistence in beings that are moved by something else. But again, having shown that the soul which is separable from bodies is different from that which is planted in bodies, it will be manifest to you which of these two possesses freedom of will, and that which is in our power, which is subservient to necessity, and is under the dominion of Fate. And where the complication of these is to be found, on account of which the one dulls the freedom of the will through a subordinate life, but the other participates of a certain image of election, in consequence of its greater proximity to a more excellent nature. And science appearing to you to be twofold, it will be evident after what manner both Plato and Socrates, and to these also may be added the great Parmenides, assert that the soul, while here, is capable of knowing truth, when it is purified from material darkness, and the passions introduced into it by the body, and its commixture with corporeal natures, but that it is allotted science in a greater degree, and in a more genuine mode, when it exists beyond bodies, and generation, and bitter matter. 4. These three problems, therefore, being necessary, and having been well discussed by the ancients, partly by Iamblichus in his copious and elaborate treatises on Providence and Fate, and partly by all the lovers of Plato, who proclaim that the soul is twofold, by Plotinus likewise in many places, and also by Porphyry, who make a distinction between contemplation and contemplative virtue, and in short by all who are able to understand Plato. This being the case, it is necessary that, beginning from the first thing proposed, we should discover the difference between Providence and Fate. But in everything, says Plato, it is requisite to know the one principle of that which is the subject of speculation, or we must err in everything. It is necessary, however, as the demoniacal Aristotle teaches, after inquiring if a thing is, to investigate in the next place what it is. If, therefore, you inquired whether Providence is or is not, and in a similar manner concerning Fate, it would be requisite in the first place to show you that each of them is, and if you still doubted, I should be unwilling after this to answer your doubts. But since you acknowledge that both of them have a subsistence, and that all things are comprehended in their dominion, it evidently remains, I conceive, that I should demonstrate to you what each of them is. For from this it will be evident what it is in which they differ. And this being known, many of your doubts, as we have said, will be solved. But again, because to the discovery of what a thing is, the dividing method is said to contribute, which Socrates in the Philebus celebrates as the gift of the gods to men, and because what are called our common conceptions contribute to the discovery of principles, from which conceptions it is possible, as Aristotle writes, to investigate many things that are demonstrable. Hence it is requisite that we also, employing both these, should unfold Providence and Fate, so far as pertains to what we say they are, using common conceptions, but so far as pertains to other things, employing distinctly the divisions of beings, from which, as it appears to me, we can alone discover what the definitions are of Providence and Fate. But these, being known, will enkindle a clear light in the subjects of investigation, and will perhaps free us from the doubts by which we are at present detained. 5. The common conceptions, therefore, of all men, and which possess indubitable evidence, assert that Providence is indeed the cause of good to those beings for which it provides, and that Fate is also a cause, but the cause of a certain connection and consequence to those things that are generated. For that all of us have these irrefragable conceptions about Providence and Fate is evident from our asserting that men, who are the procurers of good to others, have well provided for the subjects of their beneficence. And again, we denominate that which is evolved through many causes, complicated with each other and unknown to us, no otherwise than Fate. Our life also is full of these names, because names testify the truth of these conceptions. For the word providence, pronoia, indicates that energy which is prior to intellect, and which it is necessary to attribute to the good alone. For this alone is more divine than intellect, because much honored intellect desires good, together with all things, and prior to all things. But the word fate, emarmene, indicates that which connects all things that are naturally adapted to have such a connection. Moreover, that the thing which is provided for is not the imparting, nor that which is connected, fate, nor that which proceeds into this connection, but that which connects. You may assume from this, that all of us conceive providence and fate to be certain productive powers. But everywhere effective causes are distinct from their effects, and these three things differ from each other, videre licet, that which makes, that which is made, and the energy of making. Just as in what pertains to providence and fate there are that which provides, that which is provided for, and the effective energy which proceeds from the providing cause into that which is provided for. And again, there are that which connects, that which is connected, and the effective energy proceeding from the connecting cause into the thing connected. And it is evident that according to each of these triads, that which makes is not such as that which is made. But if the latter is various, it is necessary that the former should be simple, and that if the participant of good is the thing made, the maker should be imparticipable. For everywhere that which makes is allotted a part more divine than that which is made. When we say, therefore, that providence is the cause of good, we must also say that it is the fountain of good, which does not require to be benefited by other things. And admitting fate to be the cause of connection, we must not say that it is itself connected by other things. Such, therefore, being the common conceptions which we antecedently assume of these two, it remains in the next place that we should consider what it is in which each of them excels, and by which each is characterized. And first, in what the characteristic of fate consists. 6. From these conceptions, therefore, we infer that fate is the cause of things that are connected. But let us consider what the things are that are connected. Of beings, therefore, some have their essence in eternity, but others in time. By beings, however, whose essence is in eternity, I mean those whose energy, together with their essence, is eternal. But by beings whose essence is in time, I mean those whose essence is not, but is always in generation, or rising into existence, though it should be in generation for an infinite time. And the natures that subsist between these are such as have their essence indeed permanent, and better than generation, but their energy measured by time. For it is necessary that every progression from things first to last should be effected through media. Since, therefore, there are beings which are eternal, both in essence and energy, it is necessary that there should be a middle extent, and that it should either have an eternal essence, but an energy indigent of time, or the contrary. The contrary, however, is impossible, that we may not confess that we place energies prior to essences. Hence it remains that the medium must be that which has an eternal essence, but a temporal energy. We say, therefore, that we have exhibited to you these three orders of beings: the intellectual, the psychical, and the corporeal. But I call the intellectual that which exists and is intellective through all eternity; the corporeal, that which is always rising into existence, or becoming to be, either in an infinite time or in a part of time, and the psychical, that which is eternal indeed in essence, but which employs temporal energies. Where then must the things which are connected be arranged? Consider, assuming from the Gods the meaning of the term eresthai, to be connected, as implying nothing else than this: that the natures which are differently produced according to time are conjoined with, and not separated from each other; and if existing at one and the same time, they are distant from each other according to place, yet they have a certain coordination with each other. Hence, being separated either by places or times, they are in a certain respect collected into unity and into one sympathy through connection. And in short, the things which are connected cannot suffer this from themselves, but require something else which may impart to them connection. If, therefore, the natures which are arranged under Fate are such as are connected with each other, according to our common conception of Fate, but the things which are connected are partible, being distant either in places or times, and are naturally adapted to be connected by something else, on account of the opinion of connection which prevails among all men, and these are moved by something else and are corporeal. For of the natures which are beyond bodies, some, id est, intellects, are better both than place and time, but others, videre licet, souls, though they energize according to time, appear to be pure from place. If this be the case, it is evident that the things which are governed and connected by Fate are moved by something else, and are entirely corporeal. 7. If, however, this is demonstrated, it is evident that admitting Fate to be the cause of connection, we must also admit that it presides over altermotive and corporeal natures. But assuming this, we will ask ourselves what that is which is said to be the cause of bodies, which is proximate to them, and by which things altermotive are inspired and contained, and accomplish whatever they are able to effect. And if you are willing, looking in the first place to our bodies, let us consider what it is that moves and nourishes, and always reweaves and binds them together. Is not this that which is innate in bodies, which also in other animals exhibits a similar energy, which extends as far as to things that are rooted in the earth, and possesses a twofold energy? This, indeed, renovating bodies, that they may not by disruption entirely vanish, but that preserving the several individuals in a condition conformable to nature. For it is not the same thing to add what is deficient, and to preserve the power of things that are held together. If, therefore, not only in us and other animals and plants, but in this universe also, much prior to bodies, there is one nature of the world which is connective and motive of the subsistence of bodies, as it is also in us, or why do we call all bodies the progeny of nature? It is indeed necessary that nature should be the cause of things that are connected, and that in this what is called Fate should be investigated. And on this account, perhaps the demoniacal Aristotle also is accustomed to call those augmentations or generations which are effected beside the accustomed time, deviations from Fate. And the divine Plato says, "that the world considered by itself, without the intellectual Gods, is convolved as being corporeal by fate and innate desire." The oracles of the gods also accord with these and bear witness to our demonstrations when they say, "Look not upon nature, for the name of it is fatal." And thus we have discovered what fate is, and how it is the nature of this world, and a certain incorporeal essence. For it presides over and is the life of bodies, and this essentially, since it internally moves bodies, and not externally, moves all things according to time, and connects the motions of all things that are distant both in times and places, according to which also mortal are adapted to the participation of eternal natures, are convolved together with them, and these are mutually copassive. For the nature which is in us binds and connects all the parts of our body, and their operations on each other, and this also is a certain fate of our body. As in our body likewise, some parts are more, but others are less principal, and the latter follow the former, so in the universe the generations of the less principal follow the motions of the more principal parts, viz. The sublunary generations follow the periods of the celestial orbs, and the circle of the former is an image of the circle of the latter. And these things, which have been divulged by all the ancients, I am unwilling to prolong. 8. It is not therefore difficult for you to see what Providence is. For if you assert that the fountain of good is primarily the divine cause itself, you will speak rightly. For whence, except from divinity, is good imparted to all things? So that, as Plato says, "No other cause of good than God is to be admitted." In the next place, Providence, being established above both intelligibles and sensibles, is superior to fate. And those things which are under fate are also under Providence, possessing indeed their connection from fate, but their participation of good from Providence, so that the connection may have a good end, and that Providence may contain the end of fate in itself. But again, with respect to things that are under Providence, all of them are not likewise indigent of fate, but intellectual natures are exempt from it. For the empire of fate is entirely in corporeal natures, since to be connected introduces time and corporeal motion. To these things also, as it appears to me, Plato looking says that a subsistence of this kind is mingled from intellect and necessity, intellect ruling over the necessity of bodies. And in this place he calls the motive cause necessity, which he elsewhere denominates fate, conceiving that bodies act by compulsion, and this rightly. For every body is compelled both to do whatever it does, and to suffer whatever it suffers, to heat or to be heated, to impart or to receive cold. But choice is not in bodies, because you may say that their peculiarity is the necessary, and an existence unaccompanied with choice. For if this were not the case, what could there be that is better than bodies? For the body which is moved in a circle, and which is of an illustrious nature, is thus moved from necessity, in the same manner as fire is from necessity moved to the circumference, but earth to the middle of the universe. Plato therefore asserts that necessity presides over the generations of bodies, and on this account over their corruptions also. But he exalts intellect, and determines that it rules over necessity. If therefore providence is above intellect, it is evident that it rules over intellect, and those things which are under this necessity, and that necessity alone rules over those things which are under its dominion. Hence, everything indeed which has an intellectual subsistence continues to exist under Providence alone, but everything which has a corporeal subsistence endures under necessity. 9. You must understand therefore that there are two genera of things, the one intellectual, but the other sensible, and also that there are two kingdoms of these, the kingdom of Providence indeed above, which reigns over both intellectuals and sensibles, and the kingdom of Fate beneath, which has dominion over sensibles alone. And Providence differs from Fate, in the same way in which a God differs from that which is divine indeed, but by participation and not primarily. For in other things also, as you may see, one thing has a primary subsistence, and another is according to participation. Thus, for instance, there is light in the sun, and light in the air, but the former subsists primarily, and the latter subsists on account of the former. And life is primarily in the soul, but secondarily in the body, and subsists on account of the life of the soul. Thus also, Providence indeed is essentially deity, but Fate is something divine and not deity, for it depends on Providence, and is, as it were, its image. For if as Providence is to intellectual, so is Fate to sensible beings, since the former reigns over intellectuals, but the latter over sensibles. Then alternately, as geometricians say, as Providence is to Fate, so are intellectuals to sensibles. But intellectuals are primarily beings, and sensibles derive their subsistence from them. Hence Providence is primarily that which it is, and from this the order of Fate is suspended. But of these things enough. End of section 9.